Today we're looking at the Helios 44 58mm f2 lens. Now this is a lens that was produced in the Soviet Union for years and years. And you may find it under different brand names, Jupiter, KMZ, or you may just find it labeled Helios 44 on a Zenit camera. Whatever the brand name, it's a lens that was probably produced in the same factory in the Soviet Union between 1958 and 1999. It was a prolific lens, and during that time it underwent a couple of changes, but not too many changes. So they're all pretty much the same. Earlier ones are all metal mount, metal barrel. Later ones have more plastic on them. I prefer these earlier ones. They're built a little better. They did produce them in a couple of different camera mounts, but what I see mostly is the M42 mount like this one. The earliest versions have, I believe, 13 aperture blades. The later ones had between 6 and 8. This one has 8, and it's a pretty typical of what you'll find out there. Now there are no shortages of reviews of this lens on the internet or online, probably because there are literally millions of them produced. It's one of the most prolific and most produced lenses in the history of photography. Now, as I said, it was produced in Russia, in the Soviet Union, and I would say because of that, partially because of that, it's typical of most Russian products. Workmanship is a little shoddy or shabby, and sometimes you'll find focus to be very loose or sometimes very stiff. Now, as I said, I like the older ones that are all metal. They also have fewer moving parts, which makes them less susceptible to failure. And if you find one that hasn't been used in a long time, you'll probably notice that focus is very stiff. When I found this one, it was very difficult to move the focus. Now all I did was apply a little heat with it. I used a hair dryer and I aimed it right on the barrel to soften up the grease in the focusing barrel. And now it's pretty good. So that's all it took. Now, why would you want one of these lenses? Why would you want to add one of these to your collection? Well, first off, they're fairly reasonably priced. On eBay or other online auction sites, you can probably get one of these for under $75. If you find one in a thrift store, a second-hand store, or an estate sale, I would guess you'd pay quite a bit less than that to get one of these. And if you're fortunate enough to find one on maybe an old Soviet SLR camera, it may be even less than $20. So they're reasonably priced. That's one nice thing about them. The second thing is that these lenses, they're classic vintage lenses that produce distinctive images. When you use this lens stop down, well, not stop down, but wide open at either f2 or f2.8, the lens can produce some fantastic bokeh or blurring. Now, for those not familiar with the term bokeh, it is a term that describes the effect of having the subject in sharp focus and the background with a nice blurred effect. And this lens can produce a wide array of bokeh effects. It can produce either smooth, nice blur, or it can produce swirling, circular blur, and all of these effects make it a favorite with photography students. Lately, this lens has become more popular used in video, and I believe that's probably because of the nice bokeh effect that it produces. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this lens a little more closely, and then we're going to take some pictures with it. maybe do some video with it, see how it performs, and then determine whether you'd like to add one to your collection. So stay tuned. We're looking at the Helios 44 58mm f2. As I mentioned in the introduction, this lens was manufactured for over 40 years, so they're pretty easy to find and plentiful. The lens went through a few changes over the years, but for the most part it's the same lens from start to finish. I happen to like the earlier all-metal models. They just seem to be more well-built to me. Now, the very earliest versions of this lens had 13 blade apertures, but I mostly see the 8 blade versions. The 13 blade versions are sought after because they produce even more of a pronounced bokeh effect than the 8 blade versions. The 8 blade versions, as I mentioned, can be found for under $100 usually on online auction sites and in photography stores, but the 13 blade versions are harder to find and can cost all the way up to $300. So definitely more rare and definitely more expensive. Most of the versions that I've seen are M42 screw mount versions, and these are easy to adapt to DSLRs and mirrorless cameras with adapters. But there are some Pentax K-mount versions out there, but I rarely see them. But if you find one of these and you're a Pentax user, it would be great, as Pentax really hasn't changed their K-mount since its introduction, and you could use this with Pentax K DSLR without an adapter. I mounted the lens on a mirrorless camera and took some photos of some flowers in my yard. To highlight the bokeh, I kept the aperture setting at either f2 or f2.8. So here are a few photos that I took. These lenses have become more popular with video users. I believe this is because they produce a nice, smooth, out-of-focus background, and they can be quite flexible. You can get a nice circular background also. You just need to remember the limitations of this lens when you are using it for video applications. It's manually focused, and it probably wouldn't do well for action shots or action videos, but it's great if you're going to focus on a subject and you want to produce a nice smooth background. So here are a couple of videos I took using this lens. We've had the opportunity to take a look and use this Helios 44 58mm f2. And it's an easy lens to use. As I said, this one's an M42 mount, and it's easily adaptable to DSLRs or mirrorless cameras. They also produce this with Pentax K mount, I think, in the later years, so also easily adaptable and can be used on Pentax DSLRs without any adapter. I think it's a great lens, and I think the effects that you can produce with this lens, with the background, make it a lens that you'd like to add to your collection. On top of that, they're not really expensive, so keep your eye out for them, and they're a fun lens to use. Thanks for watching.